My name is Elva and I'm Chinese. I currently live nomadically, meaning I've been traveling around the world and living 1 to 2 months at a time. And I am currently a content creator and a writer. I used to work in tech. I worked really hard to kind of just have a savings so I can dedicate myself for things that I love to do. I was born and raised in China and moved to Canada when I was at the age of 16. So I would say up until age of 16, I had like very traditional Chinese and Asian upbringing. I totally believed that like women would not have that much of their own career. Like I at the time aspired to be more of like a supportive type of role. I remember going to like dinners with my like dad and learning about how to interact with people in a more like businessy type of vibe, and then thinking myself that like this will make me a great wife afterwards. I've always been like a good girl growing up. I was very polite and always know like how to say the right thing, and then I think I'm forced to have high emotional intelligence to as a result of very controlling parents. And I would say like up until I was like 16, people probably wouldn't describe me as rebellious. Like I'm a good student, I'm good at school and all this sort of stuff. And but I am also a big people pleaser. So when I got to Canada, I think it was just like this period where like everything collapsed at once. Like I am in a new country. I have to speak a new language. I got bullied in school in Canada, and I think there was a little bit of like all of this are here, and then I feel so oppressed that if I don't do something about it, I'm just gonna collapse. I started to like distance myself from the friends that used me, and I started to express to my parents that like I don't want to do accounting, and it will suck out myself for that. And yes, like that obviously triggered a lot of emotions from them, and I think they have fear of like me not being able to support myself, and they took a very drastic measure of like, then you support yourself financially now. My independence comes from more from conflicts between my parents, in the sense where they're very controlling and they want me to go into a discipline that I don't want. And it's so if I don't go into that discipline, then they wouldn't financially support me. And for me, that means like doing something that I don't love forever, which has nothing to do with feminism in particular, but I think it's the search for independence and the search for financial freedom in this that really sparked my feminism. That I realized a lot of things that I was doing before was to please the people around me to survive. And once that necessity to please people and then to like survive in that little environment is gone, you just naturally become more of a free person. And I started becoming more like economically independent because of my own desire of like wanting to be free, wanting to pick what I want in life, and eventually started to have all this awakening and realize all these things that were taught and put upon me that was not naturally my own thought. I remember I had one friend in university that took a gender class, and after she took that lecture, she became very aggressive in my words at the time, that like she always get into these kind of debates with guys. And then I was like, she is very extreme. And like at that time I was still like, oh well, yeah, like I don't think I experienced gender inequality in life. I could not like identify any gender inequality in life. I remember coming like around that time. I remember coming across The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, And that very famous quote where when like the lucky thing with being a guy is that you're always required to take a venture to try hard as a kid, but women are always like tempted with a lot of temptation to like not try so hard, not being so tiring, or like, oh, you're lucky that you're a girl, you don't need to like support the family, like that kind of soft this encouragement. And I think ever since I realized that, and I started paying attention to these kind of things, and it's just so common. When I remember when I was in university, I was doing my own startup, and I had one friend from my elementary school that is also doing startup in China, and then I was talking with him about like doing startup as like a college student and stuff. And then I just remember him saying that like, why would you do that? You look good, you should be a secretary instead. I was like, he's giving me a compliment of my look, but this feels very uncomfortable for some reason, and I didn't even have the phrases to call out what is uncomfortable with it. And I feel very lucky nowadays I can recognize this and like, gosh, how did you not realize it back then? So naturally, when I used to work in Silicon Valley working in tech, I made a lot of content about career development and personal development. And I didn't think like I didn't know too much about feminism. I didn't talk much about feminism, but people naturally labeled me as a feminist for just being a more career woman among the typical Chinese content out there, which at the time it was just a lot more about makeup and skincare and tutorials and stuff like that. And I think I almost feel like some sort of obligation of showing up in camera in a more raw format, that like I want people to see what real women look like and what real women care about, which is not only just that one aspect that like patriarchy really influenced us to care about. So nowadays I get to not go to work in a traditional sense and dedicate myself more to creation. And because of that, I naturally can make things that are more like thought-based. I started examining more like how I grew up, or like how women grow up in my society, and how these like little tiny influences that does not show up only in the form of like physical violence and all those kind of things shape our preferences and how we think about the world. So a lot of my more recent work is kind of about this idea of like unwiring these societal conditioning, and which is also kind of how the main premise behind my first book as well. I call it the protectionist mindset. The idea is kind of like, how do you isolate yourself out of all these influences and find your own agency in this process of becoming yourself. I think a lot of it has to do with storytelling, and then figuring out what, focusing on what people really long for. And with feminism, to me, like, it's not a very theoretical or academic thing. Like, the very basic of it to me is like, how do you help women live more freely? And how do you empower women to know that you can live more freely as a woman, which I just frankly didn't know when I was in like middle school. And I didn't know women have like another path that can live very happily without a loving relationship. Like, I grew up watching K-drama and Taiwanese drama, all that sort of stuff. And I think that is a lot what I'm doing with my content and what my peers are doing with their content. For example, one content that I posted this week got like more than 3 million views. And naturally, just like people want a life like that, like not specifically going to a castle in France, but like a life that they can do what they love and say no to things that they hate. And I really do think like China is experiencing a very big degree of feminism awakening. It really shows that like people can be inspired for like really small things that like it feels very fortunate for me that I get to play a small role in their life. My nonprofit type of like organization organization is called Cheryl, and that is banned. That naming is banned because I guess it's polarizing. Which obviously is sad because, like, why can't you say hero but you can't say Cheryl? Polarization is a problem the government is very sensitive of, and in China there is very sensitive of this. And I understand, right? Like, a women don't want to have kids and don't want to get into marriage and have a polarizing relationship with men, then we don't have people to work for the workforce. And of course, if I were the government, I would be sensitive of this as well. When you face these kind of danger type of situation, like, your natural human body start to get into a more animalistic mode, that, like, you feel physically in danger. But one thing is, like, when I encountered it again and again and again and again, then you start to get used to it, that, like, okay, this is not the end of the world. And for the longest time, I really feared that my account could be banned and taken away. And I had to work on that fear. And I think back to my days before I created content, and was I living a miserable life that's completely meaningless? No, right? And I think if that be the day, which probably means that my idea has invoked a lot of change or influence, that, like, it become threatening, and I can see that as, like, a token of success as well, and which at that time, then I can explore other ways to make impact in the world, that I can continue to find meaning in my work.